Love yours. Love yours.
Welcome, welcome. We're so happy you're joining us this afternoon. Welcome to Creating Zola Mondays. I'm Dr. Linda James Myers, your moderator, along with our other wisdom keeper, Dr. Harvey Linder, and our wonderful, brilliant young professionals who will each introduce themselves. I'm a past president of ABPsi as well as a elder emeritus and a distinguished psychologist. And we're so happy to be able to share with you in the midst of this February Black History Month, which is every month, but whatever. So happy to share with you today. Our theme today is celebrating and elevating Black joy. And our subject this second time around is strengthening interrelationships across the diaspora. So I'm going to let the rest of our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right into our conversation.
Well, I'm Harvey Linder. I'm a member of the ABPsi Ethics Committee, and I'm also a co-founder and past president of the Minnesota chapter of ABPsi, and I'm a past Midwest regional representative.
Very good.
Mm-hmm. Hey everybody, I'm JoJo Hickson. I'm a third-year clinical PsyD student at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. I'm also a member of the DC chapter and work with the social media impact team.
Hey everyone, I'm Robina Onwong'a. I am a counseling psychology PhD candidate, and I am the Student Circle Communications Chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Garrick Beauliere. I am a fourth-year PsyD candidate at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology DC campus. I'm the current vice chair of the DC chapter of ABPsi, and I am the current Eastern graduate representative of the Student Circle.
Excellent. Evan Baptiste, who is the Student Circle chair currently, is unable to be with us today, so we miss him, but wish him the best on his endeavors. At this time, let's turn to our subject at hand, and I want to begin with a question. Our subtext is strengthening interrelationships across the diaspora. What do you think have been the biggest challenges to interrelationships across the diaspora?
I think definitely racism, obviously, and racism is a blame for everything. But I think that a lot of the times when we internalize it, you see different groups within our diaspora kind of picking and choosing certain things they like about other people that might be a part of the diaspora. And I feel like there's a lot of, the closer in proximity to whiteness you are, be that in career or values associated with your culture, then the more, I don't know, I know we can't be racist, but the more that you might downplay another person who's not a part of your particular part of, African culture. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
Interestingly, I just came from another conversation where we were actually touching on this topic, because we're talking about we as African Americans have a particular experience with race and racism that our brothers and sisters in the diaspora did not have. Their experience largely has been more one of colonialism than the kind of racism that we as African Americans experience. And oftentimes there's some tension between an expectation that we have that they will share our concern about how racism has impacted us, and we see that as a way that racism actually impacts the entire world. And we expect other people to share that, and they don't see it from our perspective. And many of our brothers in the diaspora actually think that we pay too much attention to race and racism, and that we should be like, we're so focused on that we're not doing the work that we need to do to lift our people and help ourselves change. So that was one perspective that came up in the discussion. Another perspective that came up in the discussion is that oftentimes when our brothers and brothers and sisters in the diaspora come here to interact with us, they have been given misconceptions about us by other people and told not to trust us, and given negative conceptions of who we are and how we are as a people, and they bring those conceptions with them. And so just wanted to share that with you because I just got out of a discussion about that very topic.
Excellent. I'm sure that's been experienced by many of us. Robina, Garrick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I could go ahead. I think you said a lot there, and it connects to when you asked the question about, like what one of the biggest challenges is. I'm thinking of like having the common enemy, and we talk about supremacy or white savagery. And I know that a lot of the things that you said, Dr. Linder, so me being African, my parents are Kenyan, I've like witnessed that within like other African households or African communities where there's a lot of representation of what African or Black Americans are and how they do things just from what is shown on the media. Because even us now, present day, the things that we see on the media, we know that everything is not an accurate representation of who we are. So imagine like people in a whole different country seeing that kind of stuff and having no context to what's going on. But yeah, I think of the common enemy, and I think of like white supremacy or white savagery, and I think about how it affected Africans on the continent through colonialism, and how they're still experiencing like the vestiges of what that looks like within their own spaces that they should be like taking ownership of, and that they're the majority race in. But then the same thing is happening to us here, where we're still being impacted by that because of slavery. So.
Yeah, no, Rabin said a lot. No, really valid points as well. I think just to echo a little bit of what she was saying, I'll just elaborate more on like, I guess, the media side. I feel like what's affecting us a lot can be due to ignorance, but not ignorance that's due to our fault. I feel like the media plays that role of I guess perpetuating that ignorance. So I'm Black, I'm Haitian, and and I think when it comes to that, there's Caribbean Blacks, and there's African American Blacks, and then there's the African Native Blacks. And I think a lot of it plays, back to like what media is. And I think going to like, about like what Black love represents, like a lot of us, may not have been exposed to Black love within our own lives. So we look at the media and TV to see, what's a good representation of, Black love or Black family, things like that. And we have to understand like the media doesn't necessarily represent the typical Black family, Black love. So if that's just one aspect, think about just other aspects of what Black people are, not just Black love, but, not just Black love, I guess, romantically, but Black love, platonically, Black love, Black friendship, Black economics, like everything Black related, and how it's perpetuated through the media isn't really from, I guess, our perspective. So I think the idea of just us assuming what we see on TV is just the norm. There's people saying like, oh, I didn't even know Africa had, mansions and roads. I thought it was just, huts and stuff like that. Something as simple as that is just like how that's perpetuated through the media. And people just believe it to be as true. So I think it's just ignorance on our part, but it's not always our fault, because we're not in control of the media. We're not the ones that's, disseminating these kind of informations and these ideals. So I think it's just us questioning what we are perceiving and also being open to, I guess, being open to being educated on what the reality is.
Absolutely true. In fact, I agree with what everyone has said. Ditto, ditto, ditto. It is so imperative that we begin to think for ourselves and then we create what we think. I'm just amazed. If you think about it, what if you had no experience with non-immigrant Africans in America, which is what I call the descendants of those Africans who were kidnapped and trafficked to America to build the wealth of this nation as well as that of their captors. If your only notion of who they are is through media, you're in trouble because you haven't a clue. In fact, even if you're highly educated, you still may not have a clue, because who's writing about the true experience in reality? Very seldom do you see any non-immigrant African American even talk about loving to be Black, how wonderful it is to be Black, how happy they are to be Black. Most of the literature you're going to read is about, oh, I was ignored, I was this, I was that. And surely that's the reality of all of us in this society due to the savagery of white supremacy. But it's not the reality of all of us, because we're not monolithic, whether we're from another geographic area or whatever. The reality is that the savagery of white supremacy, of systemic racism by design, has divided us. Divide and conquer has been an extraordinarily effective strategy. And therefore, when I was teaching at a large Midwestern university, we used to get a lot of students from Africa, the Caribbean, as well as the non-immigrant African Americans. And all of my students in the psychology of the Black experience course talked about how wherever they were from, they were told non-immigrant Africans in America, Black Americans were this, that, or the other, everything the media pushes that's negative. And my non-immigrant African Americans had heard this whole notion that Africa, the continent, was backward, blah, 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 blah. That was by design, so much so that if you were an African American, non-immigrant African American, and you wanted to even welcome an African student into your home, it was very hard. Mostly those students were shipped to European American families. And therefore, they came expecting that, non-immigrant African Americans don't even care about us, so they don't even like us. We don't even have access to them. So all of this, and this is something everybody has pointed to, is by design. And I think you spoke to the fact, Garrick, that since it is by design, what are we going to do about it, and how can we change it so we can elevate, celebrate Black joy?
Yeah, I think like knowing the history and just learning the history, I think, just knowing where we're coming from. I think I read it somewhere, but it was just like, Black history doesn't begin with like slavery, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, and, it's unfortunate, but, that's what I thought it was, when I was a little kid, because that was like, it's like, when you're learning U.S. history, whatever, it's like, that's where they start, and it's just like, okay, so so it's just how it just all interconnect, even just through the educational system and things like that. It's like what you said, Alan, it's all by design. So I think we have to go out of our way to really educate ourselves, to know our own history. And then I think that will help us being able to accept and embrace it, because I think some of the things that we are taught, we're kind of like, ashamed of it, or we're just not proud of it. And that kind of manifest in like self-hate and things like that, which, helps the white supremacy. So I don't know. I think just really taking the time and that initiative to really educate yourself outside of, I guess, formal education when it comes to like our history.
Absolutely true. In fact, one of the things that has been a tension between non-immigrant African Americans, and I want you all to speak to my use of this terminology too, it probably is unfamiliar to many, and Africans who are migrating to this country, is that they feel many non-immigrant African Americans, as we've tried to search our history, our African history, many of us have gone back to classical African civilization, which we know emerges from Southern Africa all the way up the Nile Valley, across to West Africa, across the Atlantic, and found this here. Many of us have really delved into classical African civilization, and many contemporary Africans who are immigrating here, even scholars, feel that we've kind of ignored them, or we jumped over them, or don't pay enough attention to their more immediate experience. So that becomes a complication as well, even as we try to pursue the truth of our history.
I think a big thing for me, like within our group relations, has been about, I guess, really whose we are, who we belong to. And I feel like I heard this beautiful quote that I'll never forget, and I'm probably gonna misquote it now. And it was like that African Americans are African without home, without being welcome home, or something like that. And that's kind of how I feel when I speak to other people in the diaspora. I just feel like they do definitely have this lens that we are uncultured, and that's a choice, when that's definitely not the case. It's been robbed from us, I feel like. So I think that there's a disconnect between the fact that we definitely are the same, just with different experiences.
I think one of the interesting things, just in terms of my research, is that despite the fact they've tried everything to deny us access to the truth of our history and culture as captives in this society, we went within and drew out the strengths of African cultural tradition. I call it the wisdom tradition of African deep thought. And it has really, really, really survived us and allowed us to transcend 400 years of the most brutal treatment ever documented in the history of humankind. So we have those strengths in common potentially, but we also have in common that miseducation, that deliberate attempt to divide and conquer and separate us.
And I think, like, just focusing on the present, I think there's just so many different issues that it's really hard to like figure out where to begin, and how those issues, even though we all have that common, I guess, shared, I guess, history and experience of slavery, I guess, like, now it's just so many different layers of issues amongst just the different types of Black people in America. And it's just like, like, where do you begin? You have, like, just like where Black people can't even, some can't even, like, eat or have shelter, whereas others are trying to make it in the educational system, whereas others are just like, in between. And it's just like, what struggle, I feel like it's like the oppression Olympics, trying to figure out which areas to combat first. And, in reality, there's so many different areas that we can combat at the same time, but it's just like, I feel like there's just so many different issues. It's kind of daunting to figure out, I guess, how do we attack this with having everybody on board, where other people may not be as engaging, because they have their own issues to work to address. And it's just like, I think that's that disconnect, because it's been so systemic in everybody's lives and intergenerational. Like, we're all trying to figure out our own issues without really coming together to attack, I guess, the main issue, if there is that one main issue.
That's what's so exciting about Black psychology and the Association of Black Psychologists, because we've spent at least the last 50 years, if not longer, trying to figure this out. And we've really come up with some good answers and solutions. I see you smiling, Dr. Linder. Do you have something to share?
Well, I probably wasn't going to comment on what you were about to say, but I was thinking about what I do and what I try to teach to others. And one of the things I try to do and teach is to recognize that different is good. That what we spend a lot of time struggling with is we spend a lot of focus on the differences that we have. So much so that we ignore the commonalities that we have. And there's always going to be both. We're always going to have differences, and we're always going to have commonalities. We want to build on the commonalities, but we also want to recognize that there is strength in difference. There is strength in diversity. And if we can appreciate the differences, and we can appreciate the diversity, then we can also appreciate the commonalities, and we don't have to put one at war with the others. We all started as one people.
All of humanity did, in fact.
All of humanity, yes. I mean, all modern humans descended from people who lived in Central East Africa 100,000 years ago. All modern humans. So we all come from that same source. We journeyed out across the planet. We settled in different areas. We developed different cultures. We began to look differently. We began to practice differently. We began to speak differently. But we all have the same source. And ultimately, that's a good thing because we learn different ways of survival and different ways of existing in the world. And that's all of value to all of us. Eventually, maybe not in the next 100 years or 200 years, but eventually, we are all going to come back together as one people, as one culture, with diverse knowledge and diverse experience. All that wealth that we've gone out into the world and built on and transpired and passed down generation after generation for 100,000 years. Eventually, we're going to be able to make use of all that by coming back together. We're not going to be able to make use of it if we continue to war with each other over the differences. We have to appreciate that the differences exist for a positive reason. We need all that knowledge. We need all that experience. We need to learn how to put it together and make use of it in a common bond. And so that's how I think about it. And that's how I try to get other people to think about it.
Well, I think we've been socialized to believe that differences equal deficits, as opposed to differences being of high value. That being said, then I think that if I can turn my phone off, sorry about that. I think that when we think through the Western mindset, differences are deficits, then it's very hard to break out of that. But I think the fact that we are one people, one humanity, and we originated in Africa, I think that speaks volumes for why an Africological or an African-centered perspective is so essential to the salvation of humanity at this time, because that's the only thing that we do share in common. If we can go back and grasp the height of this wisdom tradition of African deep thought and bring that forward, then that really becomes a basis for us to reconceptualize differences. I always like to recommend people look for Edward Bruce Bynum's book, Our African Unconscious, where he does an excellent job going back to the historical roots of all humanity and tracing all the proliferation of differences that now have become manifest and assigned to particular groups, and shows what the roots are so that we can really see and know what our common realities are prior to colonization or enslavement or all those things that have happened to us as people of color.
Yeah, something that when you were talking about differences, Dr. Linder, I thought back to the quote that JoJo referenced, and I believe it's a James Baldwin quote: "To be African American is to be African without memory and American without, the privilege." And it makes me think of gatekeeping, like this thing that we hear a lot in psychology and what that means and how we're supposed to protect these different standards of the field and stuff. And I've seen that we do that a lot in the Black community, like trying to check people's Blackness. And for example, like if they're, recently, like within the last few years, a lot of Black Americans have become more like aware of their cultural roots and become more proud of it. Whereas that's different from what we experienced, like let's say when I was in elementary school. But with that, I've seen like people like on the internet trying to say like, oh, well, you don't really know about that, or, being very like possessive of it or trying to check them. And it's like, well, we're actually all African. The thing is that they just didn't grow up with that. And so it almost becomes like this, like you said earlier, Nana Linda, this tension of, if we're not even like welcoming folks to be aware of and to practice their culture, then how can we ever move past that? Like, I think people were talking about how Beyonce was like culturally appropriating when she made Black is King, or people doing different things like that, to where it's like, that's part of their culture. It's just that maybe they didn't know before, or they're showcasing it in a different way than you would like want them to, but I think that's part of the issues, that we always want to check people and like check their Blackness. And somebody in the comments also mentioned Afro-Latinos, which I think is part of it too. It's like we don't often include them in the conversations because of the differences that we see there as well, that we don't like look at and try to celebrate.
That's so very true. I think that people are confused because of the missocialization. We talked, I think, last time about this whole idea of the psychology of oppression that denied us access to the truth of our history and culture and negated it as non-immigrant Africans American. But I think it also happened to continental Africans as well as Caribbean Africans and South American. We've all been denied access to the truth of our history and culture. And so as we began to really go deep to what I call the deep structure of culture and really bring forward those philosophical assumptions and principles that can shape our view of the world so that we don't have a need to be better than or put down others. We feel so good about ourselves as intrinsically worthy human beings. I really, really, really love your difference. And I really, really, really want to know more about it and celebrate it just as you will mine. But I think the chief block to and creator of our disenfranchisement and alienation from one another really comes from not knowing the truth of our history and culture at the level of cultural deep structure. Because the languages, the dress, the diet, all of that is going to be different, even which part of the country you're from, whether it be which part of Kenya or which part of the US. But the reality is, if we go to the deep structure of culture and we get to that spiritual aspect of being, which is worldwide and universal, as one of my clients used to say, then we can really, really, really see, I don't have to be defensive. I don't have to be insecure. I don't need to put you down. Actually, I need to lift you up. But because we've all been so brainwashed and missocialized into the fragmented, suboptimal, materialistic view of the dominant culture in the West, be you in the US or a colonial in some other part of the African diaspora, we really have to learn how to let that go. First of all, become conscious of it and then make the decision, are we going to let that go or are we going to maintain it? Because if we're going to maintain it, then we'll never, ever come together to be the humanity we need to become.
Yeah, and with the suboptimal worldview, I think of how it's such an individualistic culture, and by nature, we're more collectivistic people. But within this society, what we've kind of been trained in being individualistic is to like a lot of mistrust. In addition to the mistrust from, like genocides and slavery and colonialism, there's now like this mistrust of each other because we want to like move, on our own and kind of like watch our backs and check for, our own people who may be like stabbing our back because we've been put in environments where there's like a scarcity mindset. But really, if we were moving more collectively, we would be able to like move towards, what's the principle, umoja, or unity, so that we're able to continue to build our communities and to love one another instead of thinking that someone is trying to get over on us in the process of anything that they're doing.
So true.
And I don't know, like, I definitely agree with everything Robina said. And like, I really appreciate this conversation. And it just goes back to, so I just recently saw Judas and the Black Messiah, and like I was just thinking about like some of my friends, we all saw it together, and it's just crazy how like that we have these leaders, we have these people that promoting African unity, and then white people, white savages still try to find a way to interrupt that foundation that we've been trying to create each time. And it just goes to show like how manipulative it can be in regards to how they see us, because the cop that kind of convinced the Judas to betray Fred Hampton, he was kind of comparing the Black Panthers to the KKK in the sense of like how it just was just pure lies. But it's just really ironic how we're just always try to unite, and they just always trying to keep us separated. Even how Fred Hampton was uniting all the different gangs, and it's just like it just goes to show like how powerful united we can be. And it's like I think they know how powerful we are when we are united, which is why they're doing all these different attempts to make sure we are divided, because we're really powerful beyond our measures. And I don't think we all realize that as a people. And I think once we collectively realize that, I feel like that's when change will happen, because like I feel like they already see it, that potential that we do have, and we just need something to wake us up within ourselves so we can be united and realize, kind of like Dr. Linder saying, like, we can appreciate our differences, but still come together as a people.
So true. Well, if nobody has anything to say, I always have something to say. But the reality of overcoming what you just talked about, Garrick, bringing the conscious awareness that divide and conquer has been the rule of the day for 400 years that we know about. And we still allow it to be the rule of the day by allowing us to become divided. But the key, I think, is learning how not to succumb to that divisiveness, so that we really feel that connection. And that's why the idea of celebrating and elevating Black joy is so critical to that process, because we do have within us and within one another the basis for tremendous joy and pride if we can simply access it. But all too often there's those instances. So for example, I heard on the news last week that there is a Nigerian running for governor, I believe, of maybe Michigan or something.
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, who wants to get rid of Black History Month and make it American history. And, I thought, oh my goodness, what do we do about that?
And it's scary because he has like he's in a role, like he may potentially have a role of power, and with that kind of mindset, it's just like, yo, it's crazy.
Yeah, it also looked like, because I was on his Instagram page, that he had served in the military as well. So it's like he has some sort of history with the US, or feels maybe some sort of patriotism. So definitely, if there's those white people in Michigan that, are on the same boat as him, they will allow him to have that power. And then to the divisiveness point, I feel like a lot of times when there are non-Black people that don't, or even Black people, but non-Black people that don't understand the struggle, they tend to point to Black people who are like this, the anomaly, who say things like that, like, oh, we don't need a Black History Month because it's so divisive, so that they can kind of like prove their point of, yeah, well, even your own person is saying this. I don't really know if there's a word or a phrase for that, but I hate that. I hate it so much, because I feel like it just drives more of the narrative that they want us to go by. Yeah, tokenism, yeah, all that.
So it's so easy to play us. That's what the terminology is. We're being played when we have Black people who've internalized so much racism and oppression and have learned, oh, I get rewarded if I do other Black people in. I get more power, I get more money, I get more this, I get more that, and are willing to sacrifice because of that individualism you spoke of earlier, Robina, having adopted those values of individualism, materialism, competition, having internalized those, they're just more than happy to play the role of doing other Black folk in. In fact, we have probably one of the most powerful non-immigrant or descendants of non-immigrant Africans in America in the Supreme Court today. What? How did someone with that kind of mindset get in that kind of position? And I think you really nailed it as you talked about what it's like for people to get rewards for dividing and negating.
And that's a reality that we live with, is that the system of rewards is set up to do that. It's set up to acculturate us to a standard that is out of sync with our natural tendencies. And the defense against that again is self-knowledge. It's knowing who you are and whose you are, knowing yourself. If you know yourself, people can't play you because you understand that they are the ones who have the misconception. You don't have the misconception because you know who you are. You know who you came from. You know your history. And then people can't do the rope-a-dope on you. But yeah, Garrick, I'm sorry, I interrupted you just as you were about to talk.
No, it's all good, and you're definitely right. I think just going back to just that movie because it's just so fresh in my head. It's like the guy that essentially because I was reading stuff about it prior to the movie and the rest of after, and this guy that essentially betrayed the Black Panther and Fred Hampton. He was a teenager, and the cop kind of manipulated him in the sense of you have these charges and you get to go to jail for a couple of maybe 5-10 years or whatever, unless you do this thing, kind of like we were talking about, rewards and things like that. And his reward was to not be in prison. And it's just so crazy how so many of us are just, I guess, manipulated into these rewards to save, exploited, JoJo, in a sense to save ourselves by, I guess, essentially betraying, our people. And it just goes back to what I was saying about it's just like they see the potential, and it's just like I just want more of us to realize the potential and power that we do have, because it's something as like they wouldn't be this, I guess, this diligent, in trying to separate Black people and trying to stop Black people and doing all this stuff if they didn't see the potential and the power that we do have as a people.
That's true. They see our unity, as a threat to their position. And in some sense, it is a threat to their position, but it's not a threat to their well-being. Actually, their well-being would be enhanced by us achieving the goals that we're setting out to achieve. They don't know that, so they see it as a threat. And so the system of rewards has been organized, to cause us to basically act against ourselves. And I know I experienced that in my career when I was coming up. It's like, people praised me because I wasn't like those other colored folks. When I was in graduate school, my professors would say to me, well, if you're gonna spend your time studying that Black stuff, you're not gonna do as well, in the program and in the professional career. And when I became a manager, it was like, you need to be like these other managers, don't get too far out of your lane here, and the reality is that you do progress more rapidly in this system if you play that game, if you go, over, if you like stop doing all the Black stuff and and like they're saying, like, why are you going to ABPsi meetings? Like, why aren't you going to APA meetings with us? And the people who went to APA meetings did progress, in their careers. And so, it's a reality that we have to deal with, that we have to act against. But in order to deal with it, we have to be confident about who we are and what it is that our long-term goal is. And it's not an anti-white agenda. It's a pro-human agenda. And it's not just for the benefit of Black folks. It's for the benefit of the world.
JoJo, your thoughts?
I forgot what the question was, but I did get triggered while y'all were talking because I remember there was some discussion about the use of the word tribe and tribalism. And so I'm wondering, how can we reach over to our sisters across the diaspora and be like, teach me, and, what are your differences, but also maintain our differences and that we're not monolithic. So I was wondering, what are all of y'all's thoughts about that, tribalism and tribe?
I'd say, keep focusing on diunital thinking, because the way we get trapped up in this is that we subconsciously start thinking either or rather than both and we forget, that yes, it can be both and. You can be part of this tribe and be part of the whole. You can be part. You don't have to lose your individual identity to be part of a communal self.
I think the challenge has been that tribe as a construct in academia, at least, has been tribalism, or a tribe has been assigned to ethnic groups of people who have been people of color. You don't hear French or Germans or anybody else referred to as a tribe.
But they have tribes.
So the point that I'm making is that we have to, first of all, we need to know, particularly in this social context, what the agenda might be in terms of adopting certain ideas. And then, as Dr. Linder just shared, the idea that we all are alike, but we are different, and we all have affinity for those people who are most like us, oftentimes. But again, the core issue is how we're viewing the world, how we're seeing things, and the idea of diunital logic, which is what Dr. Linder was just referring to. So our conclusions aren't either or, but both and, is coming to us from a very strong and rich cultural tradition, this wisdom tradition I keep referring to, so that as we begin to view the world in that way, then we don't have to be so tribal in the negative, in the pejorative sense, but we can be both proud of our uniquenesses, but not have a need to disparage the uniquenesses of other people, and figure out how we can affirm who we are and affirm who the other is. And that's going to require getting out of the mainstream Western mindset that says it's either me or you. It can't be both.
I think also just realizing that when it comes to, I guess, words or just things, like, we as a people, not just Black people, but just as humans, we give power or give attention to whatever we think it is. Like, there's really no meaning to literally, I feel like there's not a lot of meaning to things, like kind of like what Dr. Linder was saying last week or 2 weeks ago, that we give meaning to things. So, like, in a sense, like, APA and ABPsi, like, it's giving the meaning to ABPsi. That's what makes it so special. And that people giving meaning to APA, talking about like award shows, like BET versus like the Grammys, and like how people are just so, hyping the Grammys, but that's only because we gave the Grammys that platform. We allowed the Grammys to be like that. But if everybody or people just didn't care about it and focus all their attention, like, I don't know, at the BET award shows, that kind of esteem and that kind of reputation would be, I guess, to level of Grammys, because why we're putting that attention and putting that work into it. So I think when it comes to tribalism, you are just using the word tribe, I think us just being proud of using that word and continuing to use it will enhance the meaning of what it is, and I think not being afraid to say it. And I think people are, the literature world, are just, white psychology, they'll adjust to it. It's not like there's any less meaning. I don't think the meaning is any less because they're not using it, because there's different cultures. But I think us just being proud of using the word, and why do you use that term, given that, and that opens room for educating them and things like that, to, I guess, using just more often.
So what would you mean by it, Garrick, since you're going to be defining it and using it? What does it mean?
To me, I think to me it's just having,
as you want other people to adopt it, what would you hope they mean by it?
I guess, like, so, like, JoJo mentioned, like, think of it in negative connotation. I think sometimes people would try to look at tribe like kind of like as informally, in the sense of it can be used in a formal setting. It can be used in whatever liking they want. Yeah, Jojo, you can answer this since, yeah.
No, I'm asking about the meaning. So we're going to use a term.
Mm-hmm.
Tribalism.
Yes, but what do we mean by it? If we're going to want people to use it, what do we want them to mean by it? Because as you said, power is in the ability to define reality, and we define things and then proliferate their use based on the definition.
I think it's essentially just having that common humanity, that shared meaning of whatever, group or culture is coming together as a tribe. I feel like it's more a collective thing, not an individualistic thing. So whatever that group's culture or whatever the meaning of whatever that group, whatever that tribe sees as fit, that can be, what tribe means. I feel like each tribe there could be smaller tribes and to a bigger tribe. I just think the meaning comes from whatever culture, I guess, puts the meaning to it. Kind of like what Dr. Linder is saying, like, white people weren't, kind of like what you were saying, how like white people don't use, like French or I guess the English don't really use the term tribe, but they have tribes, but they just didn't, that's just not their, that's just not the term they particularly use. I feel like the word tribe is more common than we think. I just think it's just semantics in the sense of Black people using the word tribe and I guess non-Black people not using the word tribe, but essentially it still is a tribe. So I guess it's
I'm just asking for a definition. What is a tribe? What is, for you, what does it mean? Or anything, just you.
Yeah, can I pop in, Garrick? Because you're going on a but I think for me, it's been met lately to identify people who share my goals, my aspirations, my cultural values. So specifically in an academic space where there are a lot of white students who don't get, being transgressed against, then if I see another Black woman who's like, all right, my dissertation is on Black racial trauma and this, that, and the third, then I'm like, oh, she's part of my tribe. Like we have the same mindset. We're attacking something at a different angle, but at the end of the day, we're going to be supportive of one another. And that's something that cannot be shared with white people, So like, that's how I've been using it. So that's why I'm trying to figure out why it has a negative connotation, but I do know like, white people making everything evil. So.
Yes. When I first saw it on our communication thread, like the term tribalism, I thought of how it's often used in a lot of African communities because post-colonialism, a lot of what happened, like especially in Kenya, the way that things happened for us being colonized by the British, the tribe that was left with the most power was the one that, in a way like succumbed or was most forced into like whiteness, or they were closest to that in a way by, sharing the power with the British people. So the way that tribalism has been used historically for us, like I even had to look it up because I was like, oh, I thought it was, used in a pejorative way most of the time, but I guess it just depends on the context. So when I looked it up, it was like, just organizing according to like tribe or group or whatever. But when I've heard it used often, it's more negative, referring to us being so like into our own group and basically like disliking another group. So like the tribe that I'm from, maybe being downplayed by another tribe because our tribe is not the tribe that is like the wealthy tribe in Kenya, or our tribe is, this and that. So when I've seen a lot of like, or heard a lot of African people using it, that's how it's been used. But that has been because of like the, result or the consequence of like colonialism coming in and now separating or like putting the tribes against each other.
Absolutely true. Global white supremacy, because if you think about it, when Africa was divided into countries, they separated tribes. So half your group could be in one country and the other half in another, and then pitted people against each other. So the neo-colonialism, Robina, that you speak to, was by design focused on identifying the tribe who was going to do the bidding of the colonizer and rewarding them, not differently than happened in chattel enslavement in this country. The overseer gets to be the one who gets rewarded and supported by doing other people in. So we see that contrast over and over and over again throughout the colonialism. In fact, you could think of non-immigrant Africans as an internal colony in this country. But I think the idea that, as JoJo points out, I certainly have my tribe. I love them. And the idea of having people who have camaraderie, shared values, shared expectations, shared aspirations is critical to achieving the kind of true freedom and liberation that we need. I really, really, really think the idea of affiliating with people whose minds are liberating, whose hearts are really in touch with that divine spiritual aspect, see themselves as spirit beings, are not tied up in the mainstream dominant values is essential to the survival, actually, of people of African, acknowledging African ancestry.
Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it helps me to get people to like think about it outside of the context that you normally think about it. Like, you know, when we think of the word tribe, you know, we often think about, you know, ethnic groups of ethnic African people. But you know, you all know that that when European colonialists came to this country, they did the same thing with the indigenous people here. They formed alliances with some groups of indigenous people to help them fight against other groups of indigenous people. And you know, and that carried on across, you know, the nation as they moved from the East Coast, you know, across, you know, to the West Coast. And you know, when they were moving across the Midwest, what we now call the Midwest, you know, there were groups of indigenous people who said, "This is crazy! Like, yeah, we're all allying, you know, choosing to ally with them to fight against each other." And there was this indigenous leader whose name was Tecumseh, who tried to get all of the, you know, what we call Indian tribes to form an alliance and fight against the whites, and it scared the hell out of them. And they, you know, put together all the resources they could to try to get rid of, you know, Tecumseh and his followers, because what he was doing is going across the country and organizing these different, you know, indigenous groups of Native people to recognize what was happening to them. This divide and conquer mentality that was going on, and to turn that against the whites who were moving in.
Divide and conquer, we're back full circle, aren't we?
I think in terms of, since we're almost wrapping up, like solutions or like as we've been doing, talking about more of like a celebrating and elevating Black joy, I think that what I've noticed is our generation and the conversations that we're having now, you know, intergenerationally, is, you know, moving in the direction of being less tribal in the pejorative way and being, you know, more like loving of our tribes, our differences, and like our, you know, collective Blackness or African identity. And I think that that's one thing that we can continue to do is we're not going to hopefully be hit by the okie doke of selling our own people out or, you know, what they've done for like history, even like with one of my favorite African leaders, Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, like how they basically got someone to his like right-hand man to kill him just because of the illusion of like what reward they were going to give, the white people were going to give him. Those kinds of things I feel like shouldn't be happening as much because we are learning who we are and whose we are, you know, that whole know thyself concept. So I think as we move more in that and bring our people in, I feel like the positive of having tribes, even I know someone in the chat asked about like basically whether having organizations like Divine Nine and Jack and Jill, like how that contributes to separation or otherness and colorism. And I feel like the positive for that could be that having different tribes, it like kind of makes smaller groups so that we can be able to like focus on the ultimate goal, which is Black liberation within those groups. And then we come together as like a whole, like after we've all kind of talked about this, because I know a lot of those organizations have similar missions. So for me, it's just like kind of breaking it down so that we continue to do it like at a small scale and then like come together and be able to, do it at a larger level. And I know there's like obviously other negatives too, but just like highlighting the celebration aspect of it.
I think it's important to look at what is the value of tribes? What is the value of small groups? What is the value of affinity groups? And there is value. I never belonged to Jack and Jill, but I assume that it has some value. I think of it, similarly to other groups where you join a group because you feel some kinship with the group, or you get a sense of support, having a support network around you, and you get a chance to achieve within that group. And so it's not that any kind of group in and of itself is good or bad. I mean, they can all have some positive mutual benefit, as long as you're focused on like what it is we're for, what it is we're trying to build, and not get caught up in what it is we're against. What is our group is against that group because they have a different interest than our group has.
I think theoretically what you say, Dr. Linder, makes sense, but on the practical level, there's something wrong with the Ku Klux Klan. Something wrong with white supremacy. And to me, so
I'm not going to argue with you there.
What you're saying is so true about values, but I think the values really become most critical in terms of what are the values that you're.
But it is in sync with focusing on what are you for as opposed to what you're against. When you get to groups like the Proud Boys and the Ku Klux Klan, those groups, the binding force among those groups is what is
the binding force among my group is I am the elite of the Black community. I am of a class that's superior to others in the Black community, because we do have people who those are their values. Mm-hmm. And that's what the purpose of the group is to do. So my point is simply this: if we want to come together, we're going to have to do that critical self-reflection and introspection about what it is we value. Because if our values are still in line with that fragmented, suboptimal elitism, classism, and all the other isms, then probably that tribe may not be in a position to really come together with people who don't meet the criteria that they have said are a part of the other. And I think the value of our creating and celebrating and elevating Black joy is finding within ourselves those values that are amenable to sharing that kind of joy. We're almost out of time. I don't want to take up more. Any last thoughts, JoJo, Garrick?
No, I don't have any last thoughts, but I'm definitely going to do some digging and research and try to further educate myself on topics like this. I'm just really in tune to the chat. We have a lot of interesting discussion going on there. But yeah, this has been great.
And I definitely appreciated this conversation as well.
So complicated where we are given our missocialization. But
if it was easy, somebody would have done it a long time ago.
That's probably true. And I'm so proud of the Association of Black Psychologists and the Student Circle for giving us this kind of platform where we can bring those things forward and talk about things that will help us celebrate and elevate Black joy, as well as deal with some of the complications. But I do believe that we got this when we go back and really get into who we really are versus who others have said we are. So thank you for joining us today. And I think if we can just continue to pursue the highest good, pursue the best of us, the best that is within us, the best within our tribe, then we'll be onto something. Because I think when we do that, we'll realize there may be only one tribe, just like there's only one race, the human race. And if we can do that, it'll be good. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next month. Enjoy your Black History Month and celebrate and elevate Black joy.